An arrogant and powerful man leaves a shabby suitcase at the door of a nursing home and speeds off without looking back. The woman, nearly 80 years old, watches it all, not understanding why her own son, the one she sold her house to help, was leaving her there like a disposable burden. But a shocking discovery inside that old suitcase would change everything forever. Before we begin, if you enjoy inspiring stories, subscribe to our channel. And now, let's get started. The rain beat insistently against the windshield of the luxurious black car as it parked in front of St. Jude's Senior Care Home. The engine purred softly, a stark contrast to the heavy silence that hung inside the luxury vehicle. From the passenger seat, a grey-haired woman watched the simple facade of the home through the fogged-up glass, her trembling hands clutching a small, worn leather purse. Richard Mason adjusted the knot of his Italian tie and took a deep breath. At 45, he had built a culinary empire that spanned the entire Chicago metropolitan area. His fine dining restaurants were frequented by the city's elite, and his personal fortune exceeded 8 figures. He had everything he had ever dreamed of: status, recognition, and power. But at that moment, looking at the woman beside him, he felt only a crushing weight on his chest. "We're here, Mom," he murmured, unable to look her in the eye. Helen, at 78, had dedicated every day of her life to her only son. She had worked as a housekeeper for decades, cleaning the homes of wealthy families while raising Richard alone in a small apartment on the south side of Chicago. Her hands, now marked by age and hard work, still trembled slightly, a consequence of the neurological problems that had been manifesting in recent months. "This place looks nice," she said softly, trying to hide the confusion in her voice. "Are we visiting someone here?" Richard's heart constricted. His mother's episodes of disorientation had become more frequent, and he could no longer handle the situation. Not while trying to maintain his flawless image in the social circles he now moved in. The shame of his humble origins had always been an open wound, and now, with his mother gradually losing her lucidity, he felt trapped between two realities that could not coexist. "Not exactly, Mom. You're going to stay here for a while." Helen frowned, trying to process her son's words. "Stay, but I don't understand. Our house. We don't have a house anymore, Mom. Remember? You sold it to help me with the first restaurant." The lie slipped from his lips with an ease that frightened him. The truth was, she had sold her modest home to pay off the debts he had accumulated in his first failed ventures, but he would never admit that publicly. Richard got out of the car and walked around to the passenger door. The rain soaked his designer suit as he helped his mother out. Helen walked slowly, leaning on her son's arm, her eyes scanning the surroundings with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. The lobby of St. Jude's was simple but welcoming, walls painted in pastel tones, a few well-tended plants, and the faint scent of lavender in the air. Behind the reception desk, a man of about 60 was waiting for them. It was Frank Miller, the administrator, who had lost his own family to overwork years ago and now dedicated his life entirely to caring for abandoned seniors. "Mr. Mason," Frank greeted, extending his hand, "and you must be Helen." Richard shook, the man's hand firmly, maintaining his businesslike posture. "Yes. As we discussed on the phone, my mother will require special care. I have a very demanding schedule and—" "I understand perfectly," Frank interrupted, though his eyes said otherwise. In his years managing the home, he had seen countless similar cases: successful children who preferred to pay for third-party care rather than devote time to their parents. Helen watched the conversation with growing confusion. "Richard, dear, I don't quite understand. Am I sleeping here tonight?" "For a while, Mom. Until we get a few things sorted out." Frank led them through the home's corridors, showing them the facilities. It was a dignified place, clean and well-organized, but still a place where people were left to grow old away from their families. Other residents watched them discreetly as they passed, some in wheelchairs, others walking slowly down the halls, all with the same look of melancholy in their eyes. In the room that would be Helen's, a small window overlooked the street. It was simple: a single bed, a small wardrobe, an armchair, and a nightstand. Richard placed his mother's old, battered suitcase on the bed, the same suitcase she had used for every trip in her life, including the one time they went to the coast when he was a child. "Well, Mom, you'll be fine here. The people are very attentive But you'll visit me tomorrow, won't you?" she asked, gripping her son's arm tightly. "Promise you'll come see me tomorrow." Richard felt a lump in his throat. "Of course, Mom, of course I'll come." But they both knew it was a lie. Frank escorted Richard to the reception to finalize the paperwork. As he signed the documents, the businessman avoided looking back, where his mother had positioned herself, by the lobby window, watching his every move. "Mr. Mason," Frank said in a low voice, "may I ask a personal question?" "Of course. Are you sure this is the best decision? Your mother seems to be only in the early stages of memory loss, with proper medical care and family affection." "My decision is made," Richard cut in, snapping his gold pen shut. "I pay well for the services. I expect her to receive all the necessary care." Frank nodded, but his eyes revealed a deep sadness. "She will receive all of our care, Mr. Mason. You can be sure of that." Richard walked towards the exit without looking back. He could feel his mother's eyes on him, but he didn't have the courage to turn around. In the parking lot, under the now heavier rain, he got into his car and started the engine. In the rearview mirror, he could see Helen's silhouette in the window, one hand resting on the glass. He stepped on the accelerator and drove away without looking back. That night, in his penthouse apartment in Lincoln Park, Richard tried to focus on the financial reports from his restaurants. The numbers were impressive. In the last quarter alone, revenue had increased by 23%. He should have been celebrating, but he felt empty. The image of his mother at the nursing home window lingered in his mind, a shadow that refused to disappear. He poured himself an 18-year-old scotch and walked out onto his apartment's panoramic balcony. The city stretched out before him like a carpet of glittering lights. He had reached the top, exactly where he had always dreamed of being. So why? Did it feel like he had lost everything? Meanwhile, at St. Jude's, Helen remained seated by her room's window, watching the empty street. Frank had tried to talk to her during dinner, but she answered only in monosyllables, her eyes always returning to the window. The other residents tried to approach her, but she seemed to be in a world of her own, waiting for something that might never come. Carla, a young and dedicated nurse working the night shift, checked on Helen's room before finishing her rounds. She found her still awake, looking out the window. "Helen, aren't you going to rest? It's past midnight." "I'm waiting for my son to come back," she replied simply. "He said he would come for me." Carla's heart ached. "He will, Helen, but now you need to sleep. Tomorrow is a new day." Helen finally lay down, but not before adjusting the armchair to face the window. In case he came during the night, she wanted to be ready to see him arrive. Across town, Richard finally fell asleep on the Italian leather sofa in his living room, the empty glass of scotch in his hand, and the weight of guilt pressing on his chest like a stone. The next morning, sunlight filtered through the linen curtains of Richard's apartment, creating golden patterns on the marble floor. He woke with a sore neck, still on the sofa where he had fallen asleep. The phone was ringing insistently. It was Marcia, his personal assistant, reminding him of the meeting with the Japanese investors at 10 o'clock. "Mr. Mason, the documents for the international expansion are ready. Would you like me to cancel any appointments today? You seem tired," Marcia observed when he arrived at the corporate office in the Loop. Richard adjusted his tie and assumed his usual commanding posture. "I'm perfectly fine. Let's focus on what matters, closing this deal." But he wasn't fine. Throughout the entire meeting with the Japanese men, his mind wandered. As they discussed multi-million-dollar figures and expansion strategies, he found himself wondering how his mother had spent her first night at the home. Had she managed to sleep? Had she eaten anything? "Mason-san," said the leader of the Japanese. "Delegation, Mr. Tanaka. We are very impressed with your numbers, but our company highly values family principles. We believe a man who takes good care of his family will also take good care of our investments." Richard smiled automatically. "Of course, Tanaka-san. Family is the foundation of everything." The words tasted like ash in his mouth. Meanwhile, at St. Jude's Senior Care Home, Helen had spent the entire morning sitting in the same armchair. watching the street through the window. She had refused breakfast and only picked at her lunch. Frank was worried. He had seen this behavior before and knew the adjustment would be difficult. "Helen," he said, sitting beside her late in the afternoon, "would you like to meet the other residents? We have a group that gets together to talk every afternoon." "No, thank you. I'm waiting for my son. He promised he would come for me today." Frank sighed. What if he's busy today? Sometimes these things take longer than we expect. "He'll come," she said with a conviction that was heartbreaking. "My Richard always keeps his promises." That afternoon, a discovery would change everything. Carla, the afternoon shift nurse, was organizing Helen's belongings when she found something extraordinary inside the old suitcase. In a false bottom, carefully preserved in plastic sleeves, were hundreds of newspaper and magazine clippings. Each clipping chronicled a piece of Richard's successful journey: the opening of his first restaurant, the expansions, the awards he received, the interviews in business magazines. There were even photographs of him at social events, always, impeccably, dressed, always smiling for the cameras. But what stood out the most were the handwritten notes from Helen herself in the margins of the clippings. "My dear son, how he's grown. God bless my boy. I'm so proud of him." Frank was called to see the discovery. His eyes filled with tears as he looked through this archive of maternal love. It was more than a collection. It was a shrine of pride and devotion. "She's been collecting every article about him for years," Carla murmured. "Look here, there are even food reviews of his restaurants. She must follow everything." Frank held a particularly old clipping, a small note in the business section about the opening of Richard's first establishment. In the margin, Helen had written, "The first step to making his dream come true, selling the house was worth it." "So it's true," Frank whispered. She really did sell everything to help him. That same afternoon, across town, Richard received a call that would make his world crumble. It was Beatrice Shaw, an investigative journalist for the online portal True Stories, specializing in social issues. "Mr. Mason, my name is Beatrice Shaw. I'm a journalist. I'd like to talk to you about a story I'm working on." "About what?" he asked, already suspicious. "About elder abandonment by the American elite. I have information that you recently admitted your mother to a nursing home." Richard's blood ran cold. "I don't know what you're talking about. And even if I did, it would be a private matter. I understand your position, but it would be interesting to hear your side of the story, especially considering that your mother, Helen, worked her whole life as a housekeeper to support you, correct?" How did she know that? Richard had carefully crafted a narrative about his background, always mentioning humble beginnings, but never specifying that his mother was a housekeeper. This information could completely ruin his reputation in the circles he frequented. "No comment," he said, hanging up abruptly. But the damage was done. Paranoia settled in his mind. Who else knew his real story? Who had spoken to the journalist? And, most importantly, what else had she discovered? That night, Richard couldn't focus on work. He cancelled an important dinner with potential investors and headed home, but on the way, almost without realizing it, he drove towards the nursing home. He parked across the street and watched the building through his windshield. It was around 9 o'clock, and many windows were lit. He could see silhouettes of people moving through the corridors. Was one of them his mother? Was she still waiting for him by the window? He stayed there for almost an hour, torn between the urge to go in and apologize and the fear of facing what he had done. In the end, he started the car and drove away, unaware that Helen had indeed seen him from her room's window and had stayed awake all night, hoping he would come inside. The next day, Thursday, the situation worsened. During a board meeting at one of his most prestigious restaurants, Richard noticed strange looks from some of the staff. Conversations that stopped when he approached, whispers in the hallways. The bomb dropped when Marina, one of his longest-serving waitresses, approached him at the end of her shift. "Mr. Mason," she said hesitantly, "can I ask you a question?" "Of course, Marina. Is it true that you left your mother in a nursing home?" Her voice trembled slightly. Marina had worked as a housekeeper before getting the job at the restaurant, and the story hit close to home. Richard felt the world spin around him. "Who told you that?" It's going around among the staff. Someone said they saw an article online." Beatrice Shaw had published a preliminary piece. It didn't mention names, but described a restaurant. industry mogul who abandoned his elderly mother after she sold all her assets to finance his business. For anyone who knew Richard's story, it wasn't hard to connect the dots. That night, alone in his apartment, Richard poured himself another scotch and finally had the courage to do what he had been avoiding. He searched online for his own story. What he found devastated him. Beatrice Shaw's article already had hundreds of comments, and social media was beginning to buzz with theories about who the heartless businessman might be. Some people had already made the connection and were posting photos of him at social events with sarcastic captions about family values. But what shocked him most was discovering who Beatrice Shaw was. Researching the journalist, he found she was the daughter of Connie Shaw, a woman who had worked as a waitress at his first restaurant years ago, a woman he had coldly fired when she missed 3 consecutive days to care for her own sick mother, who had pneumonia. The connection was personal. Beatrice wasn't just doing journalism, she was seeking justice. Richard remembered the day he fired Connie perfectly. She had begged for understanding, explaining that her mother was hospitalized and she had no one else. He had responded coldly that business was business, and he couldn't set a bad example for other employees. Now, 15 years later, Connie's daughter had become a respected journalist and was investigating his own story. The circle was closing in a way he could never have predicted. On Friday morning, when he arrived at the office, Marcia was waiting for him with a worried expression. "Mr. Mason, we have a problem. The Japanese investors called. They want to reschedule our meeting. They said they need to re-evaluate some aspects of the partnership." Richard closed his eyes. "What aspects?" "They didn't specify, but..." Marcia hesitated. "They mentioned something about family values and corporate reputation." The news was spreading faster than he could have imagined. In just a few days, the reputation he had carefully built over decades was beginning to crumble. Meanwhile, at the nursing home, something beautiful was happening. Helen had finally started to interact with other residents, not because she had given up on waiting for her son, but because other seniors, also abandoned by their families, had reached out to her in solidarity. There was Mr. Hoffman, an 82-year-old retired university professor whose 3 children lived abroad and only visited at Christmas. There was Mrs. Edith, a former seamstress whose only son had placed her in the home after marrying a woman who didn't like old people in the house. And there was Mr. Manuel, a former banker whose grandchildren didn't even know he existed. Together, they formed an unlikely family, sharing stories, comforting one another, and creating a network of emotional support that their biological families had failed to provide. Helen still waited for Richard, but now she had someone to talk to about her wait. "My son is very busy," she would explain to her new friends. "He has many restaurants to look after, but he'll come get me soon." Mr. Hoffman, who had read about the story on social media, knew the truth, but he would never have the heart to crush his new friend's hopes. Instead, he decided to do something that would change the course of the entire situation. That Friday night, Mr. Hoffman sat at his small desk and began to write a letter that would reach Richard's hands the following Monday and make him question everything he had become. The letter arrived on Monday morning, delivered by a courier directly to Richard's office. The simple manila envelope contrasted with the corporate mail he usually received. His name was handwritten in neat cursive. "Marcia, where did this come from?" he asked, examining the envelope. "The courier said it was from St. Jude's Senior Care Home, sir." Richard's heart pounded. Was it news about his mother? Had something happened to her? With trembling hands, he tore open the envelope and began to read. "Dear Richard, allow me to introduce myself. I am Albert Hoffman, a retired professor of literature from the University of Chicago, and currently a fellow resident of your mother, Helen at St. Jude's. I am writing to you not as a stranger meddling in family affairs, but as someone who at 82 has also been abandoned by children who see family as an inconvenient burden. Your mother is an extraordinary woman. In the few days we have spent together, she has told me stories about you that would reveal to anyone the depth of maternal love she carries. She treasures every photo of you, every newspaper article, every small achievement, as if they were sacred. Treasures. But what impresses me most is her unwavering faith that you will return for her. My Richard is busy, she says every day, but he always keeps his promises. Mr. Mason, I spent 40 years teaching young people about literature, about the human condition, about the values that truly matter. I have seen many brilliant students lose their way, conquering the world but losing their souls. You have achieved everything society considers success, but I ask you, what is the value of an empire built on the abandonment of those who loved us unconditionally? Your mother sold her own home to finance your dreams. She worked until her hands were calloused, so you could get an education. And now, when she most needs the affection she has always given you, you lock her away among strangers? I am not writing this to judge you, but to remind you of a truth you may have forgotten. There is no true success when it is built on the denial of our humanity. Your mother waits for you every day. Perhaps it is time, however late, to honor the love she has always dedicated to you. Respectfully, Albert Hoffman, P.S. If you come to visit her, please, come as the son she raised, not as the businessman you have become. Richard read the letter 3 consecutive times. Each word was like a sharp blade cutting through the justifications he had built for himself. His hands trembled as he finally placed the paper on the table. Marcia noticed his pallor. Mr. Mason, is everything all right? Shall I cancel your morning appointments? No, it's fine. But nothing was fine. Mr. Hoffman's letter had destroyed the last emotional defenses Richard had maintained. For the first time since abandoning his mother, he allowed himself to feel the full extent of his betrayal. That afternoon, while trying to focus on a presentation for new investors, Richard was interrupted by an urgent call. It was the manager of his most prestigious restaurant, Savor, located in Lincoln Park. Mr. Mason, we have a situation here. A group of people is outside with signs and, well, they're protesting. Protesting about what? About your mother's situation, sir. They have signs that say, ungrateful sons don't deserve to prosper and boycott restaurants of abandonment. It's creating an awkward situation. For the customers, Richard's heart sank. How many people? About 20, 30 people. And there are journalists filming everything. The story had taken on a life of its own. What had started as a discreet article was turning into a social movement. On social media, hashtags like Tajan Ungrateful Son and Tajan Elder Abandonment were gaining traction, and people were sharing their own stories of family abandonment. Richard cancelled all his appointments and headed home, but on the way, he passed by the restaurant discreetly. From a distance, he could see the small group of protesters. They were people of all ages, many holding photographs of elderly people, probably their own parents or grandparents. A woman in her 50s held a sign with a picture of an elderly woman and the phrase, "My mother died waiting for a visit that never came." The scene devastated him completely. Meanwhile, at the nursing home, Helen had begun to show signs of emotional deterioration. The constant waiting was taking its toll. She ate little, slept poorly, and spent hours staring out the window. Frank was genuinely concerned. "Helen," he said that afternoon, sitting beside her, "why don't you tell me more about your son, about what he was like as a child?" Her eyes lit up. "Oh, he was such a sweet boy. Always helped me with everything. When I came home tired from work, he'd already have tea ready for me. And he always said that one day he'd be successful so he could give me a better life. And he did, didn't he? He became very successful. Yes, he did. My Richard achieved everything he dreamed of. I'm so proud of him." Her voice faltered. "That's why I don't understand why he doesn't come to see me. Did I do something wrong?" Frank's heart broke. "Helen, you didn't do anything wrong. Sometimes people lose their way, but that doesn't diminish the love they feel." That night, Frank made a decision. He called Richard. "Mr. Mason, this is Frank Miller from St. Jude's." "Did something happen to my mother?" Richard asked, panic evident in his voice. "Physically, she's fine, but emotionally." "Mr. Mason, your mother is fading. She barely eats, doesn't sleep well. She waits for you all day. I can't visit her now. The situation is complicated." "Complicated how, sir? The press, social media? If I show up there now, they'll turn it into a circus." Frank was silent for a moment. "Mr. Mason, may I ask you a question? What's more important to you, the opinion of strangers, or your mother's well-being? Richard hung up without answering. On Tuesday, the situation worsened dramatically. Beatrice Shaw published a second article, this time more detailed and with new elements. She had gained access to public records and discovered exactly how much Helen had received from the sale of her house. $50,000, an amount that corresponded exactly to the initial investment Richard had made in his first restaurant. The article also included statements from former employees confirming the cold treatment Richard gave to family matters. Marina, the waitress, had given an emotional interview about how he dismissed any expression of personal problems among the staff. But the most devastating blow came when Beatrice managed to get a photograph. Helen at the nursing home window, clearly waiting for someone who never arrived. The image went viral on social media, accompanied by the caption, "A mother waits for the son she sacrificed everything to raise." The Japanese investors definitively cancelled the partnership. 2 major suppliers suspended their contracts. And most painfully, several employees resigned, claiming they couldn't work for someone who had abandoned his own mother. That night, Richard hit rock bottom. Sitting on the sofa of his empty apartment, surrounded by the luxury that had cost him so dearly, he finally understood what he had lost. It wasn't just his mother, it was his own humanity. He picked up the phone and for the first time in a week called the nursing home. "St. Jude's Senior Care, good evening. Please, I'd like to speak with my mother, Helen Mason." "One moment, please." There was a long pause. Finally, his mother's frail voice came on the line. "Hello, Mom. It's me, Richard." "Richard? My son. Where are you? When are you coming to get me?" The tears he had held back for a week finally rolled down his face. "Mom, I'm so sorry. I'm sorry for everything. You don't have to apologize, my son. I know you're busy. When you can, you'll come see me, okay? Mom, I love you. I love you too, my son. I always have. I always will." When he hung up the phone, Richard knew his life had reached a point of no return. It was time to choose between maintaining his facade of success or reclaiming his soul. On Wednesday morning, he made the most important decision of his life. On Wednesday morning, Richard cancelled all his meetings and drove directly to St. Jude's Senior Care Home. He didn't call ahead, didn't plan what he would say, he just went. For the first time in years, he acted from the heart, not from strategy. He parked the Porsche in the same spot as a week ago, but now the perspective was completely different. He wasn't there to abandon someone, but to try to rebuild something. He had shattered. His hands trembled as he rang the reception bell. Frank greeted him with genuine surprise. "Mr. Mason, we weren't expecting—" "I came to see my mother," Richard said simply. "If she'll have me." "Of course she will. It's all she's talked about since she got here." As they walked down the halls, Frank observed the transformation in the man beside him. The arrogant businessman had been replaced by someone visibly broken, humbled by circumstance, but perhaps for the first time, genuinely human. "Mr. Mason," Frank said before they reached the room, "I need to warn you about something. Your mother has had some more intense episodes of confusion in the last few days. Sometimes she doesn't recognize where she is. Other times she confuses the present with the past." Richard nodded, preparing himself for the worst. When they reached the room, they found Helen in her usual position, sitting in the armchair by the window. But there was something different about her posture, a fragility that wasn't there a week ago. "Helen," Frank said softly, "you have a visitor." She turned slowly, and upon seeing Richard, her eyes filled with tears. "Richard, my son, you came." She tried to get up quickly, but her legs faltered. Richard rushed to support her, holding her in his arms for the first time in years. He could feel how much weight she had lost, how fragile her bones felt through her clothes. "Mom, I'm so sorry." "No, my son. You don't need to apologize. I knew you would come. I told everyone here that my Richard would come for me, that you'll—" Words were like daggers to Richard's heart. Even after the abandonment, even after a week of fruitless waiting, she maintained an unshakable faith in him. "Mom, I made a terrible mistake. Sit here next to me," she interrupted, pulling him to sit on the bed. "Tell me how the restaurants are doing. The people here are so impressed when I tell them my son has famous restaurants. Richard realized she was avoiding talking about the abandonment, perhaps to protect him from his own guilt, or perhaps because she couldn't fully process what had happened. He decided to follow her lead. The restaurants are going through some difficulties, Mum. Difficulties. For the first time, a shadow of concern crossed her face. What happened? I made the wrong choices. I hurt people. And now I'm paying for it. Helen took her son's hands. My son, you were always a good boy. If you hurt someone, it's because you lost your way for a moment. But you can fix things. You always had a good heart. How can you say that, Mom, after what I did to you? She looked at him with genuine confusion. What did you do to me? Richard realized she was having a memory lapse. She didn't clearly remember being abandoned there. In her confused mind, he had simply left and now had returned. The irony was cruel. His mother was forgiving him for something she couldn't even fully remember. They talked for 2 hours. Helen showed him the file of clippings that Carla had discovered, proudly narrating each of her son's achievements, as if it were the first time she was telling those stories. Richard leafed through the clippings with tears in his eyes, seeing decades of love and dedication materialized on paper. Mom, why did you keep all this? Because I'm your mother, my son. Everything you do makes me proud. From when you were little and drew me cards on Mother's Day, to now, seeing you in the newspapers. She still kept those childhood cards at the bottom of the box. As he was finally preparing to leave, Helen asked, "Are you taking me home today?" Richard felt his heart break again. "Mom, you need to stay here a little longer, until I solve some problems. But you'll come see me tomorrow?" "I'll come, Mom. I promise I'll come." And this time it was a real promise. That night Richard couldn't sleep. The image of his mother, fragile and lost, but still full of love for him, haunted him. For the first time in years, he knelt beside his bed and did something he hadn't done since childhood. He prayed. "God," he whispered into the darkness of the room, "I don't know if I deserve to be heard after everything I've done. But if there's any way for me to fix this, for me to become the son my mother deserves, please, show me the way. I gave up my soul to achieve success, but now I realize that without it, I am nothing." It was a desperate prayer, coming from a man who had lost everything that truly mattered in the pursuit of what he thought he wanted. On Thursday, Richard returned to the home, and on Friday too. With each visit, he felt more connected to the person he had been before he got lost in ambition. Helen, in her lucid moments, told stories of when he was a child, how he always shared his school lunch with classmates who had none, how he helped elderly neighbors by carrying their groceries. "Tysa, you always had a generous heart, my son," she would say. I don't know when that changed. Richard knew exactly when it had changed. It was when he decided his origins were a shame to be hidden, when he traded his humanity for social acceptance. During these visits, he also got to know the other residents of the home better. Mr. Hoffman, the author of the letter, became a constant presence in his conversations with his mother. The former professor had a serene wisdom that impressed Richard. "Mr. Mason," Mr. Hoffman said one afternoon, "can I tell you something? In my 82 years, I've learned there are 2 kinds of success. The kind that impresses others, and the kind that lets you sleep at night. The first is an illusion. The second is the only thing that really matters." It was also during these visits that Richard met Connie Shaw, Beatrice's mother. She had come to visit some residents as a volunteer, and to the surprise of both, they came face to face. "Mr. Mason," Connie said, clearly uncomfortable, "I didn't expect to see you here. Mrs. Shaw, about what happened at the restaurant. You don't have to say anything, it was a long time ago, but I have to. I fired you when you needed understanding the most. It was cruel and unfair." Connie looked at him for a long moment. "Mr. Mason, I lost that job, but I never lost my dignity. And my daughter grew up seeing that sometimes we have to fight against injustice. Your daughter, Beatrice, she's doing her job? She is. And she's doing it well." At that moment, Richard understood that his downfall wasn't just a punishment. It was an opportunity for redemption. All the people he had hurt over the years were now somehow connected to his current story. At the end of the week, Frank made an unexpected proposal to Richard. "Mr. Mason, I have a suggestion that might sound strange. How about you try spending a week here? Not as a visitor, but living as the residents do." "What do you mean?" "Sleeping in one of the guest rooms, eating the same food, participating in the activities, truly understanding the life your mother is leading." Richard was silent, processing the proposal. "Of course, only if you want to," Frank continued. "But sometimes, to truly understand the impact of our actions, we need to experience their consequences." "And my mother, what would she think?" "She would be happy to have you around, and maybe by living here you'll find answers to questions you didn't even know you had." Richard looked out of Frank's office window, seeing his mother in the nursing home garden, talking with Mrs. Edith. She seemed more cheerful since he had started visiting regularly, but there was still a deep sadness in her eyes. "I accept," he finally said, "but on one condition. I want to work too. I want to help care for the residents, to really understand what you do here." Frank smiled for the first time since he had met Richard. "Welcome to St. Jude's Senior Care Home, Mr. Mason. Your real journey is just beginning." The following Monday, Richard arrived at St. Jude's carrying a simple suitcase, a far cry from the designer luggage he was used to. He wore casual clothes, and for the first time in years had no gel in his hair or a luxury watch on his wrist. Frank greeted him in the lobby with a simple blue uniform. "This will be your caregiver uniform," Frank explained. "For this week. You will be Richard, a nursing assistant, not the businessman Richard Mason." The room assigned to him was identical to his mother's, small, functional, with a window overlooking the inner courtyard. As he placed his few clothes in the tiny wardrobe, Richard felt for the first time in decades what it meant to live with only the essentials. "Is my son going to stay here with me?" Helen asked when Frank explained the situation to her. Her eyes shone with a joy he hadn't seen in years. "For a week, Mom. I want to better understand what life is like here." "How wonderful. I'll be able to introduce you to all my friends." The first morning was a brutal shock for Richard. He woke up at 5:30 to the home's alarm, the same time the staff arrived to prepare breakfast for 80 seniors. Carla, the nurse who had become his supervisor, greeted him with a merciful smile. "Ready to start, Richard. Today you'll help serve breakfast and then administer medications with the medical team." Serving breakfast meant much more than just putting food on plates. It meant helping Mr. Manuel, who had Parkinson's, hold his cup without spilling. It meant cutting bread into small pieces for Mrs. Christine, who had difficulty chewing. It meant being patient with Mrs. Rose, who would forget she had already eaten and ask for the same meal 3 times in a row. "It's not easy, is it?" Carla commented, watching Richard struggle to help Mr. Hoffman take his medicine. "Each one has their specific needs, their quirks. You have to treat each person as an individual, not as a number." During medication administration, Richard discovered the complexity of geriatric care. Helen took 5 different pills, 2 for blood pressure, 1 for her heart, 1 for diabetes, and 1 to help with her memory. He had never taken an interest in the details of his mother's health. "Mr. Mason," said Dr. Antonio, the home's physician, "your mother's condition is quite manageable. With proper follow-up and family affection, she could live comfortably at home for many more years." The words were like a slap in the face. He had abandoned his mother not out of medical necessity, but for personal convenience. At lunchtime, Richard sat at the communal table for the first time. The food was simple but nutritious: rice, beans, chicken stew, and salad. Nothing compared to the sophisticated dishes at his restaurants, but made with care and affection by the kitchen staff. "Tysa, son," said Helen, sitting beside him, "you're thin. Aren't you eating properly?" The irony of the situation hit him like a lightning bolt. Here he was, the owner of a chain of luxury restaurants, being scolded by his mother for not eating properly, while she herself had spent a week barely eating because of the depression he had caused. In the afternoon, he participated in the recreational activities. There was an arts and crafts class, where the seniors did simple handicrafts, group physical therapy sessions, and the most special moment, the story circle, where each person shared a memory or life experience. It was during one of these circles that Richard heard stories that forever changed his perspective on aging. Mr. Hoffman talked about his 40 years teaching literature and how proud he felt when former students visited him. Mrs. Edith spoke of the wedding dresses she used to sew and how each one represented a dream of happiness she helped create. "And you, Richard?" asked Mrs. Christine. "Tell us one of your stories." For the first time in his adult life, Richard was tempted to tell the truth about his origins. I grew up in a very simple place. My mother worked very hard to support me. I always dreamed of being successful to give her a better life." "And you succeeded," said Helen proudly. "My son has famous restaurants." "But along the way," Richard continued, "I forgot something important. I forgot that the greatest success isn't having famous restaurants. It's being the kind of person your mother would be proud to call her son." The silence that followed was filled with understanding. Many there had experienced similar situations with their own children. "It's never too late to remember," said Mr. Hoffman gently. That night, Richard shared a room with Mr. Joshua, a 79-year-old man whose son lived in another state and visited only on special occasions. Before bed, Mr. Joshua did something Richard didn't expect. He knelt beside the bed to say his nightly prayers. "Don't mind me," said Mr. Joshua. "I've been doing this for 60 years. I'm not going to stop now." "I don't mind. In fact, may I join you?" Mr. Joshua smiled. "Of course, son." They prayed together, two men from different generations united by the same human need to find purpose and forgiveness. Richard prayed for wisdom to fix the mistakes he had made, and for the strength to become the man his mother always believed he was. On the third day, something happened that would completely change his perspective. During the afternoon shift, Mrs. Amelia, an 85-year-old woman, fell ill. She had heart problems and suddenly began to feel chest pain and shortness of breath. Richard was helping in physical therapy when he heard the shouts for help. He ran to her room and found Dr. Antonio and Carla working frantically to stabilize her. The situation was serious. She needed to be taken to the hospital immediately. "Richard," said Dr. Antonio, "I need you to stay with the other patients while I accompany Mrs. Amelia to the hospital. Do you feel up to it?" For 2 hours, Richard was responsible for 15 anxious and worried seniors. He had to calm Mrs. Rose, who couldn't stop crying, convince Mr. Manuel to take his medication even without an appetite, and organize dinner almost by himself. It was then that he realized the true scope of the work that Frank and his team did, daily. It wasn't just about caring for aging bodies. It was about caring for lonely hearts, for confused minds, for people who had lost their independence, but not their dignity. Mrs. Amelia survived the episode and returned to the home 2 days later. When he saw her again, frail but smiling, Richard understood something fundamental. These people were not a disposable burden. They were repositories of wisdom, experience, and love that society had chosen to ignore. "Thank you, young man," said Mrs. Amelia, holding his hand. "I heard you took care of everyone while I was away." "It was a privilege, Mrs. Amelia, and—" He truly meant it. On Thursday, Beatrice Shaw arrived at the home for a follow-up interview. She found Richard wearing the blue uniform, helping Mr. Hoffman with physical therapy exercises. "Mr. Mason?" she asked, clearly surprised. "Hi, Beatrice. You can call me Richard." What are you doing here?" "Learning," he replied simply. "Learning to be human again." They talked for almost an hour. Richard told her about his experience living in the home, about how he had rediscovered values he thought he had lost forever. Beatrice, initially skeptical, began to see that the transformation was genuine. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked. "Aren't you afraid I'll publish it?" "I hope you do. People need to know that real change is possible, and I need witnesses to the commitment I'm making." "What commitment?" Richard looked out the window, where he could see his mother in the garden, talking animatedly with Mrs. Edith about the crochet stitches she was learning. "The commitment to honor everything she did for me, to become worthy of the love she always gave me even when I didn't deserve it." That night, the last of his week at the home, Richard gave a speech at the story circle. He spoke about his journey, about how he had lost his way, and about how that week had shown him what truly mattered in life. "You've taught me," he said, that a person's value isn't in what they own, but in the love they are capable of giving and receiving. That true wealth isn't in bank accounts, but in genuine relationships. That the greatest success isn't impressing strangers, but honoring those who loved us unconditionally. When he finished speaking, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. On Friday morning, his last as a caregiver, Richard woke up early and went to his mother's room. She was still asleep, but he sat in the chair beside her bed and watched her. Pool. Wrinkles on her face told the story of a life dedicated to hard work and maternal love. Her calloused hands rested on the blanket, hands that had worked tirelessly to give him opportunities. When she woke up and saw him there, she smiled with the same sweetness as when he was a child. "Good morning, my son." "Good morning, Mum. Did you sleep well?" "I did. I dreamed about you when you were little. You always said you would take care of me when I got old." Richard held her hand. "And I will, Mom. I promise I will." "I know, my son. I always knew." 3 months after leaving the nursing home, Richard had completely transformed his life. Saturday morning found him not in his old luxury apartment in Lincoln Park, but in a simple 3-bedroom house he had bought in a middle-class neighborhood, specially adapted to welcome his mother with all the comfort and security she deserved. Helen now lived with him, in a ground-floor room with a view of a small garden she helped tend herself. Her medications were administered on time, her medical appointments were never missed, and she had the constant company not only of her son, but also of a dedicated caregiver Richard had hired for the times he needed to work. "Good morning, Mom," Richard said, entering the room with a tray containing coffee, fruit, and the homemade bread she loved so much. "Good morning, my son. You didn't have to bring me breakfast in bed." "Yes, I did. You took care of me for decades. Now it's my turn to take care of you." Helen was visibly better. The family environment, constant affection, and proper medical follow-up had significantly stabilized her condition. Her episodes of mental confusion were less frequent, and she had regained much of her former liveliness. After breakfast, Richard helped his mother get dressed for a special occasion. They were going to the inauguration of Richard's newest project, the Helen Mason Community Center, the first in a network of spaces dedicated to the care and appreciation of seniors in situations of social vulnerability. The project was born from the ashes of his culinary empire. Richard had sold all his luxury restaurants, paid off all his debts, and invested every penny in a new life mission. The community centers offered not only medical and social care for needy seniors, but also community kitchens, where low-income families could have dignified meals at symbolic prices. "Are you ready, Mom?" he asked, offering his arm for her to lean on. "I'm ready, my son, but I still can't believe you named the center after me." "Of course I did. You're the most generous person I know. If anyone deserves to be honored by a place dedicated to caring for others, it's you." The Helen Mason Community Center was located in the same neighborhood where Richard had grown up. It was a modern but cozy building with large gardens, activity rooms, medical offices, a library, and the community kitchen. More than 200 people attended the inauguration, including many of the former residents of St. Jude's. Frank had accepted the invitation to manage the center. Mr. Hoffman, Mrs. Edith, and several other seniors who had become family to Helen were present. Beatrice Shaw was there too, not as an investigative journalist but as a friend. Her story on Richard's transformation had gone viral, inspiring other business leaders to rethink their priorities. "My friends," Richard said into the microphone, "a few months ago I was a man who had achieved everything society considers success, but had lost his soul in the process. Today I am opening this center not as a successful businessman, but as a son who learned that our true wealth lies in the people we love and the lives we touch." He paused, looking at his mother in the front row. "This center is named after Helen Mason, not just because she is my mother, but because she represents all the parents who have sacrificed for their children and who deserve, in their old age, the same love they dedicated to their families." The applause was long and emotional, but the most special moment came when Connie Shaw, Beatrice's mother, approached Richard. "Mr. Mason," she said, "when you fired me 15 years ago, I left that restaurant in tears. Not because I lost the job, but because I saw so much coldness in someone so young." Richard lowered his head. Connie, Let me finish, she interrupted with a smile. Today, seeing what you've done, seeing how you've changed, I understand that sometimes God lets us hit rock bottom so we can find our true height. She hugged him, and Richard felt as if a 15-year weight had finally been lifted from his shoulders. The afternoon was marked by special activities. The seniors participated in craft workshops, music sessions, and the traditional story circle that Richard had come to value during his week at the home. Helen was radiant, gracing everyone with her memories and wisdom. "You know," she said during the story circle, "I always knew my son had a good heart. Sometimes life makes us forget who we really are, but true love always finds a way back." At the end of the afternoon, after all the guests had left, Richard and Helen walked alone through the center's gardens. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in golden hues that reflected in the garden's central fountain. "Mom," Richard said, "I need to tell you something. During all those years of success, I was ashamed of our origins. I was ashamed that you were a housekeeper, that we were poor. I thought that to gain society's respect I had to hide where I came from." Helen stopped walking and looked directly into her son's eyes. "My son, do you think I didn't know that?" Richard was surprised. "You knew?" "Of course I knew. I saw how embarrassed you were when I showed up at your restaurants, how you changed the subject when someone asked about family. But I understood. How could you understand? How can you forgive me? Because I'm your mother, Richard, and a mother's love is unconditional. I hoped that one day you would understand you didn't need to be ashamed of me, but until that happened, I would keep loving you just the same." Tears rolled down Richard's face. "I'm sorry, Mom. I'm sorry for wasting so many years." "You didn't waste them, my son. Everything happens in its own time. And just look at what came out of all this," she said, gesturing to the center around them. "How many people will be helped here? How many families will eat at the restaurant? How many seniors will find affection and dignity? But you suffered because of me." "I did suffer, but now I'm happy, and most importantly, I'm proud. Not of the successful businessman you were, but of the man of heart you have become." They sat on a bench under a century-old tree that Richard had made a point of preserving during the center's construction. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable. It was the silence of understanding, of forgiveness, of reclaimed love. "Do you know what makes me happiest?" said Helen. "Seeing that you found your faith again. When you were little, we always prayed together before bed. Then you stopped. I thought you had forgotten about God." "I didn't forget, Mum. I just thought I didn't need him. It took losing everything to understand that God was just waiting for me to come back. He always waits, my son. Always." 6 months later, the Helen Mason Community Center had become a benchmark in humanized geriatric care. Richard had opened 2 other centers in different neighborhoods, all following the same model: comprehensive care for the elderly, combined with community kitchens for needy families. Mr. Hoffman had become a sort of resident philosopher at the original center, offering advice and sharing his wisdom with visitors. Frank managed the operation with the same dedication he had shown at the nursing home, but now with adequate resources to do an even better job. Beatrice Shaw had documented Richard's entire journey of transformation in a best-selling book. The Few, Way Back: How a Man Lost Everything and Found Himself. The book's royalties were fully donated to the expansion of the community centers. One Sunday afternoon, exactly 1 year after abandoning his mother at the nursing home, Richard was preparing lunch at home when Helen approached the kitchen. "Need any help, my son?" "No need, Mum." "Have a seat. It's almost ready." "You've become a good cook," she said, tasting the seasoning in the beans. "Where did you learn?" "From the cook at the center. She said a man who wants to take care of his family has to know how to cook with love." Helen smiled. "She's right. Food made with love always tastes different." As they ate lunch, she made a comment that deeply touched Richard's heart. "You know, my son, I spent my whole life working to give you opportunities. I never imagined that one day you would use those opportunities to care for so many people. I think every day of hard work was worth it. More than worth it, Mom. And do you know why? Because you taught me, even without words, that true success isn't what we achieve for ourselves, but what we do for others." That night, before sleeping, Richard said his usual prayer. He gave thanks for his second chance, for the mother who had forgiven him, for the people who had crossed his path to teach him about humility and redemption. He was especially thankful for having learned that it's never too late to become the person we should have been from the start. Helen, in her room next door, was also saying her prayers. She gave thanks for having her son back, not just physically, but emotionally and spiritually. She was thankful for having lived long enough to see his transformation and for knowing that when her time came to depart, she would leave behind a son who would honor her memory through the good he would do in the world. 2 years later, the project had expanded to 10 centers in 5 different states. Richard had become a national reference in corporate social responsibility, but more importantly, he had once again become the man his mother always knew he could be. One autumn afternoon, Helen, now 80 and still relatively lucid, was sitting in the garden of the original center when a young mother approached with her small son. "Excuse me for bothering you, ma'am," the woman said, "but my son saw you sitting here alone and asked if he could talk to you. He loves hearing stories from older people." Helen smiled and gestured for the boy to come closer. "Of course, dear. What's your name?" "John," the boy of about 7 replied. "Do you have grandkids?" "I don't have grandchildren, but I have a son who is my greatest pride." "Why?" "Because he learned that the most important thing in life is to take care of the people we love and help those in need." The boy became thoughtful. "When I grow up, I want to be like your son." Helen held the boy's small hand. "Then you're already on the right path, my dear." When Richard arrived to pick up his mother late that afternoon, he found her still talking with the boy and his mother. The scene reminded him of his own childhood, when his mother always made time to talk to him, even after exhausting days. At work. "Ready to go home, Mum?" "Ready, my son." In the car, she commented, "That boy reminded me of you at the same age. Full of questions, full of dreams." "And what did you tell him?" "The same thing I always told you, that with work, love, and faith, we can achieve anything that truly matters."